Advanced 360 Education is a data-focused digital marketing company with proven positive outcomes for educational institutions. To learn more, visit a360education.com or call Anthony Espinoza at 310-704-5369. That's Advanced 360 Education. Welcome back, everybody. It's your time to EdUp here on the EdUp Experience podcast, where we make education your business. Dr. Joe Salustio back on another episode. If I haven't done enough already, I'll continue to do them forever. I am happy today because I get to bring back one of our frequent co-hosts. He hasn't been on in a while. And the last time, it's still there. The last time I had him on video, he had the EdUp Experience co-host mug, and I still see it. It's turned, but I see it. Yep, there it is. Ladies and gentlemen, here he is. He is founder of Educators.network.
Yeah.
He's Dr. Eric James Stevens. Eric, what's going on?
Joe, thank you so much for having me back. It's still there. That's where I keep my markers so I can draw things. It's a good cup. I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Well, thanks for coming on a little bit of short notice. It's good to have a network of co-hosts because we can make sure that we always have somebody at the ready here at the EdUp Experience to bring a much needed perspective, I think, to this episode. We have an esteemed guest with us today, very esteemed. And so I'm not going to give him the yay that I give to you, Eric. I'm going to give him an applause. Here he is, ladies and gentlemen. He is the John H. and Elizabeth A. Hobbs Research Professor of Cognition and Education at Harvard University. He is Dr. Howard Gardner. Howard, how are you?
Well, good to be with you, and I'm curious to see how the conversation goes.
Howard, did you know that you were going to get an applause today before you even said a word?
No, I did not.
Okay, well, there's two applauses. The crowd will literally not sit down. Howard, we're really honored to have you here. You have just put out a new book this past March of 2022, along with your co-author, called The Real World of College, What Higher Education Is and What It Can Be. And boy, oh boy, is that a question, Howard? And perhaps that is the first question we want to ask you. First of all, is the book everything that you thought it would be? And talk to us a little bit about what is in the book. What's higher education and what it can be?
Sure. This is a book where the senior author is Wendy Fishman, a researcher in social science. We've worked together for over 25 years on many different topics in an organization called Project Zero. And how we got into the project, I think, is quite relevant. We were not particularly focused in higher education. We were actually speaking to individuals of all ages about the workplace and what it meant to do good work. But about 15, 20 years ago, we heard many high school students and college students say they know what good work is. They know what it means to be ethical and to work well and so on. And someday they would aspire to be good workers, but they were going to be damned if they tried to be too ethical, too careful, too moral, because then they would lose to people who had fewer standards and fewer inhibitions. And this was quite disturbing to us. Doing the right thing is not something you should put off until you're 50 or 60. It's something that should be part of your DNA. So Wendy and I, with other people, began to work with students at Harvard, where we are, at Amherst College, where I was on the board, at Colby College, which was within driving distance, but a very different kind of school. And we realized that there's a huge amount of writing about higher education. There are multiple books each week. And the books often are interesting, but they don't have nearly enough database. So we embarked on what has turned out to be a 10-year project involving dozens of researchers and quite a lot of grants. And we ended up carrying out in-depth qualitative interviews with over 2,000 individuals from 10 different campuses. Some of them I knew beforehand, others I'd never heard of before. And we talked to 8 different constituencies, see if I can remember them. Incoming students, so freshmen, graduating students, usually seniors except at the community college, faculty, senior administrators, trustees, alums of the last 5 to 10 years, parents, and job recruiters.
Was that 8, Eric? Were we counting?
Nailed it.
No, I have your description up right here, and you got them. I'm listening to your mouth right now. I'm impressed.
Good job, Howard. Well done.
Nailed it.
Keep going.
Anyway, so we then spent over 2 years simply analyzing the interviews. We read them, we coded them. We did lots of data analysis, including word counts and things like that. And our book is really divided into 2 parts. One is just a report of what we found. And I think there were quite a few surprises there. But they also, which I think will be more controversial, but also more interesting, what we think ought to be done to make the sector healthier. So that's it. And the book came out in the early spring of 2022. And we've been busy talking about it and writing about it. And there's in fact a site, therealworldcollege.org, pretty easy to remember, where we're posting stuff all the time. And we're really trying to get a conversation going with the audience that you described to me, Joe, to people who run colleges, who work in administration, who care about it, or who care about the sector, even if they're not personally working on a campus today.
That's pretty incredible. So basically you wrote another dissertation, it sounds like, and with all of that data and encoding that data. And I wonder, before we get into some of the surprises that you talk about, how did the pandemic change or skew results? Did you have to, were you done with your study before a pandemic hit, or did you elongate your study for the book because of what COVID? Because COVID changed a lot of perceptions about higher education in general.
Yeah, fortunately for us, the data were collected by 2018. Of course, the pandemic didn't start till 2 years later, and the data analysis could proceed, though the data analysis was supposed to be done as well. I don't think the results that we have would be materially different if we did the study now than if we did it 10 years ago. But I mean, let me give you one example. When we began the study in 2012, we had no idea that the biggest problem in every campus, both volunteered and from multiple choice, were mental health issues. These were a tremendous surprise to us in 2012, middle of the Obama administration, recovery from the financial breakdown of 2008. And yet, in our study, it was the biggest single problem in every campus. Now, of course, the problems with mental health are known by everybody, and some people may think that they are a result of the pandemic, but clearly they're not. The pandemic certainly didn't help mental health, but that was an eruption that was already happening over 10 years ago.
I think that that's a powerful statement right there, where you said that when you were speaking, I thought the words you were going to say that the study would not have been different if you had done it 2 years ago, but you said if we'd done it 10 years ago, and just like how deep some of these problems that we're seeing, but we're just now just seeing it at large because of the pandemic. And that was powerful.
I think that's the case. And I've just been reading a book about the rise and decline of the neoliberal era. And a lot of things which people like me who don't study this think are recent events, we can find precursors going back quite a while. And one of the big problems in our study, which I think will jar some listeners, is what we call projectitis and mission sprawl. That is that most of the schools that we studied and most of the schools that we looked at through our peripheral vision try to do way too much, make way too many promises about what they can achieve. It's much, much easier to start a new center, a new initiative, a new associate dean or a new associate provost than it is to ever stop anything. And the result is there's just massive confusion about why people are in college, other than completely practical reasons, which I will talk about later.
Yikes. Eric, go ahead. I've got like a million questions here, but I'm not going to monopolize.
No, I'm curious as to if there's one thing, because everything is so messy and it's just so problematic, if there's one thing that right now that university administrators and presidents can be focused on, that is like the most actionable thing at their fingertips, what would that be?
Well, there are two very different answers to that question. easy action would be to ban our book. But they're band-aids galore. I think most university leaders, presidents now have very short terms, and that precludes them from undertaking something significant and working with the campus to bring it around to their point of view, or maybe better put, to a consensus view of why they have colleges and universities at all. And here's where we get into the value system of our book. Our conclusion based on our study is that unless colleges increase what we call higher education capital, we call it, excuse me, we call it HEDCAP for short, then they shouldn't be in business at all. And HEDCAP can be summarized as the ability to attend, to analyze, to reflect, to connect, and to communicate. Now, let me make this very concrete. If you were on a bus or a train or a plane, and you were sitting next to a young person who was going to college, and you talked to that student for an hour, you talk about what's in the news, book they were reading, movie they were watching, the latest sporting event, the latest scandal, the latest good news, if there were any. And if you were at all scholarly, you'd form some view about how much higher ed capital that young person had. Did they attend to what you say? Did they analyze it? Did they reflect on it? Did they say, hey, you said this before, now you're saying this, or what do you mean by that? Did they try to connect the things? So if you said something at the beginning and at the end, they said, oh, do you mean this or that? And finally, could they communicate? And we have a measure of HEDCAP. It's rough and ready, but I actually think that we have stuff available online. But if college doesn't actually make you think better and express yourself better, then it's a waste of time. The other big category from our study is called mental models. And this is also quite original with us. There are 4 ways we discovered that students and other constituents think about college. One is simply, well, I went to high school, I'm going to go to college. It's sort of the next step, and it's not reflected at all. Another one, which turns out to be the majority view of everybody except faculty administrators, is what we call transaction. And I'll come back to in a minute, because the other things which are less common, but we think are very important, are what we call exploratory or transformational. Exploratory means this is a once-in-a-life opportunity to try out something new, study a subject you never studied before, learn to play a game or an instrument, or learn about museums or labs, maybe take a junior year abroad, maybe take time off to work at a lab of some sort. That's exploratory. And transformational, which is very, very important for faculty and senior administrators, is I came to college as one kind of person, and there's things that I don't want to change, but I'm open to thinking differently, to acting differently, to have different kinds of aspirations, and maybe to become a different kind of person in some ways than I was before. And the relative paucity, the relative lack of students and other constituencies, except for faculty administration, to embrace exploring and transforming, and the overwhelming tendency on the part of students and parents and trustees to have a complete transactional view. Well, I'm going to college to get a degree so I can get a good job. And you might say, well, why not? That's what people want. That's what you should give. I have 2 very different answers to that. One is college is not a service industry. It's an educational, usually nonprofit enterprise. But second of all, if that's all we need from colleges, then why not have Google just set up its own college, Amazon, Goldman Sachs, General Motors? And of course, people get very nervous when we say that. And here's something which I hope will blow your mind as much as it blew our mind. When a student or anybody else said to us, well, purpose of college is to help you get a job. And then we have a follow-up, we say, and what happens if in 3 years the job disappears? there were almost no students, and very few other people even hadn't answered that question. It's kind of like you get the stamp and then you're set for life. That's nonsense. The work arena is totally different. It's changing all the time. AI and deep learning and computer assisted things is changing the whole workplace totally. And it is so naive to think that if you just go to college and get a degree, you're going to be set for life. And yet, and I'm going to come back to your question now. What I would like to see college leaders, not just presidents, but trustees and faculty and senior administrators, is to have a serious discussion among themselves and then their constituencies, which are parents as much as students, for reasons I could explain to you, why this isn't just the best way to get a job, which may disappear, but rather it's a one-time opportunity in life when you don't have the obligations of family and paying a mortgage and so on, to learn about new things, to communicate about them, and to actually become a different kind of person. Let me touch on that last point about becoming a different kind of person, because I'm sure that some of the people who are listening are thinking, well, that's what Americans don't like about college, is that college pushes people to the left. It makes them more liberal, less conservative, and we have to stop that. I happen to think there's not much validity in that, but the important point here is that nobody in the United States says we shouldn't have universities, because they want people to be trained in the professions. They want us to have great science, great technology. People in America are very happy when they see the list of Nobel Prize winners or the list of rank orders, which all you listeners will know about, that put out by Times Higher Education Supplement in Singapore and so on. We're very happy to have universities, but people have the impression that the 4 years of college are poisoning minds. I think that's wrong, but 4 years of college are a very important part of our university. And I could bet that most of the people who end up becoming great scientists or great scholars or great leaders had formative and transformative undergraduate education. They weren't just going there to get the degree. They were going there to learn about microbiology or about cybernetics, or for that matter, about medieval art. So that's a long spread out answer. It's probably tossed several different lines of thinking and probably resistance. But to go back to your questions, to your major question, I think business as usual, or what's the one thing we can do, have a bigger football field or buy a better restaurant. That's part of the problem. That's not part of the solution. Part of the solution is a serious conversation among yourself and among the leaders, which can be people in the community and leaders of the country, about why we have higher education at all. And that's what I think we've been kicking down the road. Let me add one other thing, sort of for extra credit. With Bill Kirby, who's a great scholar of Chinese and German education, we're putting out a book in a few years about innovations in higher education around the world. Because we Americans, and I'm an American, think we have all the answers, and we're very reluctant to learn from other places what they may be doing, which might be better in education. And most people in the world cannot believe how much money we spend on athletics. Most of it being not helpful for the budget, or even for getting donations, and how lavish our campuses are, how we compete on. There wasn't a campus we went to which didn't say our restaurant has won some award as the best restaurant. Great, but that's not why you go to college. You go downtown and with the money, you can go to a good restaurant there.
Advanced 360 Education is a data-focused digital marketing company with proven positive outcomes for educational institutions. Advanced 360 Education does not simply rely on instinct to make assumptions about audiences or key data points. Rather, through data intelligence, client strategies take on a higher level of effectiveness. To learn more, visit a360education.com or call Anthony Espinoza at 310-704-5369. That's 310-704-5369. That's Anthony Espinoza at Advanced 360 Education.
Can I just share, like, interject in this moment? I mean, I just saw on the news that the football coach of the major university where I went to my graduate school is opening up a restaurant downtown. It's the biggest news I've seen out of that university in a minute. No, I just wonder, okay, because like you presented kind of two options, right? Like kind of like go to business as usual, or stop and think and do a lot of work to change the way that people think so that we can fundamentally decrease the number of jobs that exist in higher education, because we're going to be closing schools because not that many schools need to exist. So
Well,
what if there's a third option?
I didn't say that.
But it's a logical extension,
No, but-
right?
no,
Like
but-
when we say that schools need to close.
No, what I would say is that if you have a campus and you have faculty, and if you have no value added for any other campus, then yes, you should shut down.
Which means we can agree the loss of jobs.
True, but I mean, every industry has loss of jobs. I'd like an industry to lose a job if it's dysfunctional and no longer working, and not just because people want to be petulant. What I would say is, I mean, recently a number of schools couldn't keep up financially, but they form alliances with other schools which are in better shape financially and also perhaps in terms of knowing what their mission is, and then the jobs aren't lost. What you might have said is that we have too many people in administrations and not enough faculty doing what faculty should be doing, which is to be forming students, forming young adults, and forming in the not particularly Jesuit sense, but helping to form adults who can be good members of the community, workers and citizens. That's what I think faculty, and I would say my university would fall right in there, is we're very happy to hire other people to do it and just go on and do our research and go on trips to fancy places.
I think
So
that's,
the
that's
calling
what
of
faculty do.
Sorry?
And that's what, when I look back at all my years of education, the faculty that I had did not prepare me for what I needed. They gave me knowledge. Most of the time, I was left up to myself to connect that knowledge to other places and other things, because there are so many things that are happening on a faculty's plate, and now they're responsible for making humans whole. One of my favorite things that my dissertation chair used to say were the biggest mistakes. This is Victor Vitanza. Say one of the biggest mistakes that universities ever did was to create departments, because we literally departed from one another. I'm wondering if there's a third option of embracing the idea that it's not a bad thing that universities are a service organization to help prepare people for jobs. If we embrace that while embracing the idea of helping people become whole humans, is that a third option that can provide for opportunity rather than take away opportunity?
I don't want to duck your question, but I think it's a deep question. And the question of what it means to be a whole human being, that's why I use the notion of formative education, which is a Jesuit idea, which I'm very sympathetic. That's a mammoth job, and it's much easier if the rest of the world is helping us rather than causing problems. Preparing for jobs, if you call yourself a veterinary school, or you call yourself a journalism school, or you call yourself an engineering school, and that's what you do, I have no problem. And maybe I should have said this at the beginning, and I apologize. Our study was originally called Liberal Arts and Sciences, and HEDCAP was actually originally called LASCAP, liberal art. But we stopped using that word, gentlemen, because people don't know what liberal arts and sciences mean. And that is, as you know, is where we're different from most other countries, which don't have a tradition of liberal arts and sciences. England and Oxford and Cambridge does, most other countries don't. But interestingly, just as it's declining in this country, other countries are realizing the values of a broader education. That includes China, where many people from the West will gulp, but does that include freedom of expression? But one of the things, if you said to me, well, are there things that might be different now in 2022 than there was in 2015? One of our findings was there was not much concern among students, among things that you read about in the newspaper, particularly on cable news, about woke culture and political correctness and not using certain kinds of language and so on. This was not present up to 2018. I think it would be more present now, but we have to make a sharp distinction between what the New Yorker or Fox News, to pick two very different media, decide to write about, and what happens if you go to Borough Manhattan Community College or Ohio State, two of our campuses. What captures the literati and the glitterati is often very far from students' own minds. So to go back, your question's a very good one. What it really would mean to become a whole person is that's a issue that we have thought about for centuries. And my problem with preparing for job is twofold. One, if you call yourself a job preparation place, fine. But number two, unless you can answer the questions, and what happens if the job disappears in 3 years, or the whole sector disappears in 3 years, then I don't take you seriously. And one of the things that we learned from job recruiters, and there's actually published evidence on this, is that job recruiters are really much more interested in these communication skills, the higher ed capital stuff of analyzing and synthesizing and being able to express yourself, than they are in what your major was. And that's not something that I think most non-higher ed people realize.
Howard, let me jump in and ask a question, maybe in a different way, but kind of similar context. So, a lot of people who I have interviewed on the podcast, and I would say majority, perceive the student as a consumer of a service, right? They're buying something and they get something in return. The something in return, that's why you hear the ROI term thrown around higher education a lot, right? This financial language of return on investment and so on. And you talked about those profiles of students. I can't remember. There was Explorer, Transformational, Transactional, and I can't remember what the first one was. But the argument of student as consumer comes from this evolution, right? Like the student consumer has evolved, and other than maybe a small set of universities that are focused on educating the 18-year-old, which is a declining marketplace, most institutions are looking at the adult student as their future. And the adult student is more evolved as a consumer. They're more focused on price and length, and not as concerned about, what they're getting out of a program in terms of what the deep learnings are. They're looking for a path to make more money. And that 39 million, let's just say, I think there's 39 million students that have some type of college and no degree that, didn't make it in their undergrad and now they're going back to college, and that their buying preferences and their, the characteristics of that student are much different than the 18-year-old. And that this the idea that, I know this is a multi-part question, but the idea that college can be something more in terms of intellectual thinking and, kind of going back to the original point of college and universities applies for the 18-year-old, but doesn't apply for the 58-year-old. What do you say to something like that?
Okay, well, I'm not unsympathetic to the picture that you've described. It wasn't really our focus. I mean, we were studying places which call themselves liberal arts places. Now, it just doesn't mean Ohio State doesn't have lots of other programs, but it has a liberal arts college and it uses the word liberal arts to say, let me demystify this. I won't remember all 10 schools, but I remember most of them. University of New Hampshire, Tufts University, Duke University, Kenyon, DePaul, Ohio State, Cal State Northridge, Queens College, Borough of Manhattan Community College. Oh yes, and the 10th one was a control school, Olin College of Engineering, which you probably know is one of the most interesting schools in the world.
Well done on on the memory. Well done.
One of the great things about Olin College of Engineering is one of the students we interviewed said, "I'm getting the best of both worlds: a liberal arts education and an engineering degree." But they have 80 students a year, so they can't really be a model for the country. But no, if we're talking about a sector that serving people who are not young anymore and who are very goal-directed, then potentially they're going to be competing with online and for-profit enterprises which make the same claims. And I don't really care who wins. I'm talking about young people, people who may not be 18 to 22, but who are not 35 or 50. And that's still, you can tell me maybe what percentage of people who are in higher education now are over 25 and are getting degrees. I don't think it's a high percentage still, but I don't know. We're talking about the people who are going to be the future citizens, leaders, workers in our country, and what do they need beyond high school? And Wendy Fishman, my co-author, is very, very concerned about the messages that are being given in our secondary schools, which are very much the line that you're taking, namely in your rhetoric, college is for getting jobs and you got to go to business school as soon as you can and forget all this stuff about studying the arts or doing an apprenticeship in a research lab. And I think that's iniquitous. And as you yourself said, this wasn't a situation 40 or 50 years ago. Now we have to say, has the world changed that much? Or have we gone down a very dangerous neoliberal path? One where we're really fooling ourselves into thinking that if we just give people jobs, our country is going to be fine. I think the opposite.
Yeah, I think that it's this interesting cycle that we're in because, the people I interview too, there's lots of questions on what is a liberal arts? How do we define it? Does it have value? This big question of value in higher education. Does a liberal arts education have any value for the student that enters a transactional workplace, right? And a lot of those adults...
But let me stop. Transactional workplace is not life.
Well,
it's your first damn job.
Yeah.
Nothing beyond that.
Yeah, I get it.
I am going to be 80 years old. I live on the intellectual capital which I acquired before I was 20 or 25. It is the most disservice to people to say, you can't afford to have your mind expanded. You can't afford to learn new things. We're just going to give you a first job at General Electric and the hell of it. And this really gets my blood pressure up.
Well, no, I know, but I want to complete the cycle because what happens, and we see this a lot, is because people will question the value of a liberal arts education because it doesn't have the ROI, and we're talking about it, or it's perceived not to have the ROI. The parents of the students who you would study might be among those that have debt, that are among the students that have some college no degree, and so then they have kids. And then they say to their kids, you know what, I didn't get as much out of college as I thought, so you need to go to some place that has an ROI. So it becomes this cycle of the question of whether college has value at all, not just liberal arts or business. And then it elevates to, does a degree have value? And you mentioned at the beginning, why doesn't anybody start their own universities? A lot of them are. They're just not calling them universities. Like there's Google Certs. Amazon put in $77 billion or something into their new training programs. You have Udacity, you have Coursera. So you're getting a lot of external pop-ups that will say, well, we're going to kind of siphon these people out of higher education. Thoughts around that? I mean, have we has society lost our value, our perception of value on a college degree in general?
Absolutely. I've never said it so boldly, but you're pushing me in that direction. Well, let me give you one positive.
You could have said no, just a record.
one positive note, and then I'll go to your question. We found a fair number of students at the less selective schools, the community college, the big states, and so on, who were transactional in order to be transformational. That is,
expand on that for me just a minute. That's interesting.
Yeah, they told us that they need to get the degree so that options were open to them, so they can get jobs and have experiences which they wouldn't have if they hadn't gone to college. And it wasn't about just a checklist. It was a sense there's a whole world of knowledge there, which they want to be able to explore, but because of their high school background and because their family wasn't well educated, or for whatever reason, they didn't have a chance. And we give a special star to students who are transactional with the hope that they'll be transformational. But let me tell you an anecdote. On the one hand, it may seem very precious, but I'm going to end with what Derek Bach said, and I'll tell you who he is. I recently met my I went to my 55th reunion of my college class. And this was Harvard College, but it was a time when 1 out of 3 people got in. Now it's 3%. So it wasn't that hard to get into Harvard College when I applied. And we met somebody who was quite high up in the financial world. And he said, well, I was just in college for transactional reasons. I just wanted to get a job. I didn't think I got much out of it. But we were talking with somebody who was an expert on the Ukraine in the CIA. And we were talking about what's going on in the world. And this same guy who said, I didn't get much out of college, he said, when I was a senior, I took a course on Russian and Chinese economics. And I can't remember whether it was with Fairbank or Reischauer, but that's really very applicable to the thing we're discussing about. And Howard me said, gotcha. You think you didn't get much out of college, but here's a course you probably haven't thought about in 50 years, which is influencing the way you think about things. And Derek Bach, who was the most successful president of Harvard, said, if you think education is expensive, try ignorance. Another person, I forget who, said, education is what's left when all this information is forgotten. This classmate of mine hadn't thought about this course in 55 years, but enabled him to engage in something. And that's the real tragedy. In this narrow-minded and essentially foolish notion, we focus on jobs when the jobs are going to be totally different 10 years from now, and not forming the whole person and the whole citizen it's a form of suicide. And the fact that this is a very new thing in our country shows it's not deep into our DNA. The colleges have really changed in this country because of the GI Bill. There are many, many more people, and they weren't 20 years old, they were older, could go to college and they could see what it was like to have the chance to think differently, to be, in my terms, to attend and analyze and connect and reflect and communicate.
Eric, last one over to you, and then I'll close the episode.
I think that there's a lot to unpack there. To me, we've kind of been pitting, like, we want this traditional education model to return, and we have a distaste for these other Google universities, quote unquote. In my mind, we cannot accomplish going back to a more exclusive educational model that you're describing and not have a Google company come in and take up all the people who aren't going to school now, because they understand that education is different. I feel like there's a lot to unpack in what you're saying. And I'm interested to see what happens in the next decade, I guess.
Well, I have nothing against new schools starting. I'm interested in Minerva. I'm even interested in the University of Austin. Olin is only a decade or two old. And when you said earlier that you wish that school didn't have departments, I'm completely agnostic on how the faculty are organized. I'm even agnostic on who the faculty are, as long as they take this formative education aspect seriously. So it's not going back. A better way to put it is to reinvent it. When the GI Bill came in, was the same time that you went to work for GE or GM for life. Everybody who's listening to this program knows that period is gone forever. So I'm not at all nostalgic. I'm not saying going back. I'm saying reinvent in a way that honors the mind of the young person, while realizing that some of us can remain young intellectually, and preparing people for life, including for old age, which many more people will have, but also making them people who are interested, and care about the society in which they live. And remember, what got us into this, Wendy and me, was talking to too many kids 20 years ago who said, someday I'll be a good person, but first I just want to have it all. And that nauseated us.
Howard, really quickly, how do you feel about online education? How does that play into the study, or did it play into the study?
Online education did not play into the study as much as we thought it would. We write about that in the book. And most people were much happier with in-person education. I think this is a place where we would find different stuff if we went, if we did a study in 2022. On the other hand, everything I know is that most young people are eager to go to campus again and not to do stuff via Zoom. And the research on younger people learning online is devastating. I mean, you can't substitute a Zoom for going to school every day. But no, I think that while most of the stuff in the book would be insignificantly changed if we were to run study more recently, I do think that we're learning a lot about how to do online education well. You know, in my day, online education worked best for people who already had a degree and were highly motivated and lived in India. And I don't think that's the case anymore. That's what killed Coursera and other people who had the wrong economic model 10 or 15 years ago.
All right, so here's your final question of the episode. What do you see now? After all of this work, what do you see as the future of higher education?
I think unless we pay a lot more attention to what's going on in the rest of the world, lessons we can learn from there, and unless we take a much deeper look into what kind of a society we want to have and what kind of human beings we want to have as citizens, as well as workers, as helpers, as well as wanting to be helped. I'm actually going to end with maybe the one thing that the listeners will definitely remember. We looked at how often our students use the word I versus we. Our students, this is 1,000 students, use the word I 11 times more than they use the word we. And with parents, it was 22 times as much. We are a highly egocentric society, and that's bad for us and it's bad for the world. So in that sense, I am a missionary.
Well, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. A very interesting conversation today. I know we could keep going on this one for a long time, but I gotta stop it somewhere, ladies and gentlemen, and I'm gonna stop it here. Of course, my guest host, here he is, Dr. EJS, Dr. Eric James Stevens. He's founder of Educators.network. Eric, thanks for coming on, man.
Thanks for having me, and appreciate all the words in this conversation, Dr. Gardner. Thank you.
And there he is, ladies and gentlemen. Pick up his book, The Real World of College, What Higher Education Is and What It Can Be. It will tickle your brain, make you think all about what's happening in higher ed, where we're going in the future. He is the John H. and Elizabeth A. Hobbs Research Professor of Cognition and Education. He is Dr. Howard Gardner. Howard, did you have a good EdUp experience today?
Yes, you stretched me, and I'm going to tell Wendy how it happened.
Well, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, you've just EdUp'd. Effective marketing for educational institutions requires a dedicated partner that understands the complex, constantly evolving digital landscape in which colleges, universities, and career schools compete. The EdUp Experience podcast partner, Advanced 360 Education, is a data-focused digital marketing company with proven positive outcomes for educational institutions. Advanced 360 Education does not simply rely on instinct to make assumptions about audiences or key data points. Through data intelligence, client strategies take on a higher level of effectiveness, whether the goal is driving enrollment, alumni engagement, or other educational marketing campaigns. To learn more, visit a360education.com or call Anthony Espinoza at 310-704-5369. That's Anthony Espinoza, 310-704-5369, a360education.com.